If you've ever lived in the countryside, truly lived there, you know the kind of peace that becomes part of your personality. You wake up slower, you breathe deeper, you move differently. Out here, the loudest thing is the wind pushing through the fields, or the old barn hinge complaining when I open it in the morning. That's the rhythm I built my life around. Simple, honest, quiet. The kind of quiet you don't really hear until somebody takes it away. Most mornings, I started the day the same way, with a hot cup of black coffee warming my hands and the early sun stretching long gold lines over the pasture. The cattle would be stretching awake, dew collecting on their backs like someone dusted them with silver. I always took a slow walk along the fence, checking the posts, making sure everything was right where it should be. 80 acres of land I bought with years of factory shifts and every overtime hour I could grab, hard-earned, well-loved, and deeply mine. That peaceful routine had never been interrupted. Not once. Not until the first Saturday of May, the morning I heard an engine that didn't belong anywhere near my farm. At first, I tried to ignore it. People from the nearby community sometimes took wrong turns and had to backtrack. But this wasn't a slow, confused little engine. This was something big, loud, and moving fast. I walked toward the sound, and before I even rounded the hill, I saw the flashes of sunlight bouncing off metal. Then the thing came into full view. A gleaming white luxury SUV barreling over the rise like it was competing in an off-road rally. And it wasn't on the road. It wasn't even close to the road. It was cutting straight through my cornfield. I froze. Coffee nearly slipped from my hand. Corn stalks snapped under the tires in a long, jagged line. Mud sprayed behind the wheels in two perfect brown fountains. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like a scene from a commercial for a car that has never actually been on a farm. And then, just as the SUV passed 20 feet in front of me, the driver lifted her hand and waved. Not an apology. Not a sorry, wrong turn. A cheerful parade-style wave. I stood there with my jaw half open, wondering what kind of person waves at the landowner while destroying his crops. But she didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She just kept going until she disappeared over the hill, tires chewing up the last few rows on her way out. That was my first encounter with Karen Whitfield, though I didn't know her name at the time. I only knew one thing. She drove like someone who believed rules were something invented for other people. I walked the path she'd carved, still trying to process what had happened. A full row of young corn flattened into the dirt. Weeks of work erased in seconds. I tried to tell myself maybe it was an honest mistake. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she panicked. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. That benefit lasted 3 days. Because Tuesday morning, right around the same time as before, I heard that same engine roar. Same growl, same speed, same awful sinking feeling in my stomach. I stepped outside immediately. And sure enough, she came over the hill again. Same white SUV, same chrome accents, same complete disregard for anything in her path. Only this time, I was ready enough to jog toward the spot where her path usually crossed mine. I waved her down. She slowed, barely, and rolled the window halfway. Her sunglasses probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. Her smile was the tight, polite kind that says you're already wasting my time, and the first words out of her mouth set the tone for everything that came after. "Can I help you?" she said, as if I had interrupted her routine. "Ma'am," I replied as calmly as I could, "you're driving through private property." She raised one eyebrow like she couldn't believe I had the nerve to speak to her. "There's a community easement. It's been here since the 70s. Everyone uses this road." I blinked. That was a new one. I'd read every word of my deed when I bought the property. There was no easement, nothing close to it, and definitely not a road through my corn. I said, "I own this land. There's no easement. You're trespassing." She laughed. "Well then," she said, shifting her SUV back into gear, "maybe you bought the wrong property." And with that, she drove around me, swerving wide like I was a traffic cone, and tore across the field again. That night, I didn't trust my own frustration, so I took everything to someone who could give me a calm, legal answer. My lawyer, Priya, pulled up the property records and confirmed exactly what I already knew. No easement, no shared access, no loophole, nothing. Karen was making it all up. Priya gave me simple advice: document everything. So I did. Photos, videos, Dates, times, the path she carved deeper each day. And here's the thing. You'd think that after being confronted, after being told explicitly, after being corrected by someone who actually owned the land, she would stop. But you don't know Karen. For people like her, no is basically an invitation to escalate. Over the next few weeks, her trespassing didn't just continue, it grew bolder. She drove faster. She cut deeper into the field. She started honking like she was celebrating. She blasted music loud enough that I could hear it from the pasture. One afternoon, her SUV kicked up so much dust that a calf got spooked and ran into a fence. I checked the poor thing over, calming it until it stopped trembling. Meanwhile, Karen just kept going, never even glancing back. The damage wasn't limited to crops. Soil ruts formed. Drainage patterns got messed up. And the more I tried to fix the ground, the deeper her SUV dug into it the next time she passed through. I put up signs. She ignored them. I put up bigger signs. She drove around them. I set up bright orange cones. She crushed one under her front tire like it offended her. My patience wore thinner by the day, but I stayed calm. I stayed polite. I stayed legal. Then came the morning everything changed. I was moving a feed bale when I heard a strange crash followed by frantic mooing. I sprinted toward the sound and found my pregnant cow, Daisy, trembling and scraped up. She had tried to bolt when Karen's SUV blasted through, and in her panic, she slipped into the side of a trough. Not seriously injured, thank God, but scared, bruised, and shaking. And something in me snapped. Not anger, not revenge, just a deep, cold certainty that this could not continue. That afternoon, I called the sheriff, explained everything, sent footage, showed the damage. The deputy listened, nodded, agreed it was wrong, but said because it was civil they couldn't do much unless the trespass happened while they were present. In other words, unless Karen practically hit them with her SUV, they weren't going to get involved. I hung up feeling helpless, but not hopeless. Because that night, I realized something important. If Karen wanted to ignore every sign on my property, then I needed to find a way to make the signs impossible to ignore. So I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop and researched. Not weapons, not harm, not anything unsafe. Just non-lethal, legally approved deterrent tools, devices specifically recommended for trespassing prevention on rural private land. I bought them. I documented everything. I notified the sheriff in writing. I told Priya. I placed giant reflective signs that could be seen in daylight, moonlight, or a solar eclipse. I followed the law to the letter. But Karen didn't care about letters, or laws, or signs, or boundaries, or the damage she caused. She cared about convenience. And she was about to learn that convenience ends where someone else's property begins. Because after weeks of warnings, patience, and calm documentation, I finally prepared the legal deterrent system that would stop her once and for all. And the next time she blasted through my land, that was the day everything changed. The morning of the turning point didn't feel special at first. It started like any other day on the farm. The sky still that soft purplish blue that comes right before sunrise, the faint smell of hay in the air, and the cattle stretching awake. But underneath all that calm, I felt something different, a kind of quiet readiness. I'd planned for this day carefully, legally, patiently, and I knew, deep in my bones, that Karen wasn't going to change. So the land had to be protected. I stepped outside with a quiet determination I hadn't felt before. The new reflective signs I'd put up glowed even in the early light, practically screaming warnings at anyone with eyes. The path Karen always took was clearly marked with neon flags, cones, and reflective tape. Everything was documented. Everything was safe, standard, and approved. There wasn't a single person who could look at that setup and say they didn't realize this was private land. But Karen had never been a fan of realization. I checked my cameras, multiple angles, all recording, time-stamped. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, but part of me hoped she would finally get the message. Maybe she'd see the giant signs, decide the shortcut wasn't worth the trouble, and turn back to the paved main road like a normal person. But hope doesn't always match reality. It was around 7:43 a.m. when I heard it, the familiar growl of her engine in the distance. Same roar, same entitlement, like she wanted the whole county to know she was awake and in a hurry. I stood near the barn just far enough to avoid confrontation, close enough to witness everything. The cameras were rolling, the signs were shining, the ground was freshly marked. Then the SUV appeared over the hill, that bright white paint job cutting through the rising sun like a mirror held to the sky. For a split second, the light caught her windshield, and I couldn't see her face, only the outline of someone who still believed the rules weren't meant for her. She didn't slow down. Not for the signs, not for the cones, not for the neon markers or the recorded warnings. She didn't even hesitate. She accelerated. It was surreal, like watching someone run full speed toward a glass door with a giant sticker on it that says stop. She hit the private road entrance exactly like she had 100 times before, only this time, the ground didn't behave the way she expected. There was a heavy, muffled thump. Not dangerous, not violent, just a firm, unmistakable sound of a vehicle meeting a solid, approved deterrent device. Then another. Then a scraping hiss as the SUV pitched forward slightly and came to an abrupt stop, rocking in place. I stayed right where I was, hands in my pockets, watching quietly. The cameras caught everything. At first there was just silence. Her SUV sat there at an awkward tilt, the front right corner lower than the rest. Then the driver's door flew open so fast it bounced once before she stepped out. And there she was, Karen Whitfield, in full dramatic form. She stomped onto the dirt, like it personally offended her. Her sunglasses were off for once, and I could see the exact moment her indignation kicked in. She surveyed the scene, the signs, the markers, the road, her SUV, and her mouth twisted into a furious shape. She pointed at the ground, then at me, then at her vehicle, like she couldn't decide which one to blame first. "You!" she shouted, marching toward me with all the confidence of a person who had never once considered the possibility that she might be wrong. "What did you do?" I didn't move, didn't raise my voice, didn't match her energy. I simply said, "Karen, you've been trespassing for weeks. I posted warnings. I notified law enforcement. Everything here is legal. You ignored every sign." But Karen didn't hear any of that. "Oh, don't you dare," she snapped, cutting me off. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. This road is for community use. Everyone knows that. You can't just trap people." "Karen," I said calmly, "there is no easement. This is private property. You've been told that many times." She clenched her fists, actually clenched them, like she was about to fight the air itself. "You're going to pay for this. You're going to be sued, arrested. You've ruined my car." I looked at the SUV. The only ruin visible was disappointment. The vehicle wasn't damaged. Nothing was cracked, broken, or unsafe. It was simply disabled, unable to continue because the deterrent system had done exactly what it was legally meant to do, stop a trespasser without causing harm. And the irony? If she'd just slowed down or stopped, or behaved like a normal adult, none of this would have happened. But that's the thing about entitlement. It blinds people to consequences. Karen kept yelling, pacing in circles, pointing at things that didn't matter, trying to build a story nobody was buying. And while all this happened, something amazing occurred. Another vehicle approached. This time, it was Deputy Ruiz from the county sheriff's office. Turns out, my written notice ensured they'd stop by if any activity happened on the property. Good timing, too, because Karen had reached the part of her rant where she started accusing me of sabotage, violence, and deliberately targeting her. Ruiz stepped out of his patrol SUV, hand resting calmly on his belt, expression neutral but visibly tired, like he'd already guessed what kind of morning this was going to be. Karen sprinted toward him like he was her personal hero arriving to save her from a dragon. "Officer, arrest him! This man set a trap on the road. Look what he did to my car!" Ruiz listened, patient, professional, calm. Then he turned to me. "Morning. You the property owner?" "Yes, sir. Everything's documented. The signs, warnings, devices, all approved. You got my notice." He nodded once. "I did." Then he looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, can I see your license and registration?" That alone nearly made her explode. "What? Why do you need my information? I'm the victim here." Ruiz didn't budge. "This is private property. You've been warned before, and your vehicle is disabled, in the middle of a documented trespass." Karen's jaw dropped so hard I swear I heard the click. I offered no commentary. I didn't smirk, didn't gloat, didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. I knew the cameras were rolling, and the best thing I could do was stay still and silent. Ruiz did a slow walk around her SUV, examined the road, the markers, the setup. He even checked the email I sent with time-stamped attachments outlining the exact steps I'd taken. Everything was listed, photographed, and in order. And then he said the words I'd been waiting weeks to hear. "Ma'am, you're receiving a citation for trespassing on private property. Again." Karen looked like she'd been struck by lightning. "What? You're citing me?" He put things under the ground. He did this on purpose." "That's correct," Ruiz replied. "He put legally approved non-lethal deterrents on his land, after notifying us, after warning you repeatedly." "This isn't a public road," Karen sputtered. I'm going to sue him. My lawyer will." Ruiz cut her off gently. "You'll have to move forward with that on your own time, but right now you need a tow truck. This vehicle is not drivable." For a moment, she just stood there, trembling with the kind of furious confusion only people who never face consequences feel. And right on cue, the tow truck arrived, a giant flatbed, bright yellow, loud hydraulic arm lowering onto the dirt. The driver hopped out, took one look at the situation, and I could tell he already understood everything without needing a single explanation. Karen stormed back and forth, ranting about her rights, property value, community access, and reckless endangerment, all while Ruiz documented the scene calmly, and I stood quietly near the barn, arms crossed, simply observing. It took about 15 minutes for the tow operator to load her SUV onto the truck. Karen tried to get inside it while it was being lifted, insisting she was not stepping foot in that man's death trap of a farm for a second longer, and the operator had to tell her, twice, that she legally couldn't be in the vehicle during towing. Her humiliation reached its peak when she slipped slightly in the dirt as she tried to climb onto the tow platform, catching herself on the rail with a loud gasp. Ruiz hid a smile. I pretended not to see. Karen glared at me like I'd personally caused gravity to betray her. When everything was finally secured, the tow truck driver gave a quick nod to Ruiz, then slowly backed out of the field with Karen climbing into the passenger seat, still lecturing him loudly about how she'd own my entire farm by the time this lawsuit is over. But when the truck rolled away and the sound faded into the distance, the farm grew quiet again, for the first time in weeks. Truly quiet. I stood there in that silence, breathing it in, feeling the tension drain out of my shoulders. For a moment, it felt like that first morning I ever woke up on the farm. Peaceful, calm, steady. Emotional trauma, unnecessary distress, vehicular endangerment, property sabotage, and the pièce de résistance. Irreversible damage totaling $42,700. $42,000. I laughed, out loud, alone in my driveway, because they had itemized things that didn't even make sense. One line actually read, "The victim experienced anxiety when the vehicle came to an unexpected stop." Yeah, unexpected, because she ignored signs the size of refrigerators. I walked straight to the house, scanned the letter into my computer, and emailed it to my lawyer, Priya. She called me within 10 minutes, voice calm but almost amused. "She really hired someone for this?" Priya said. "Looks like it. Well, she just made the biggest mistake she could have made. Sit tight." Over the next week, Priya did what lawyers do best, gathered facts, lined them up like chess pieces, and prepared a response so airtight it could have been used as roofing material. She built a counterclaim with photographic evidence, timestamps, sheriff documentation, property maps, witness statements, and even a report showing the legal status of non-lethal deterrent devices. When she finally sent the response to Karen's attorney, she copied me on the email. It wasn't angry, it wasn't emotional, it was calm, precise, and devastating. Legal language for your client has zero case and every bit of responsibility. I barely had time to finish reading before something else began happening, something that turned this story from a property dispute into a community-wide scandal. Apparently, Karen hadn't told her HOA she was using community funds for her personal legal war. She tried to pay her attorney retainer using the HOA card, and normally nobody checks those things because the HOA board trusted her. But trust evaporates quickly when someone tries to spend $3,000 from the community account in a way that makes no sense. The assistant treasurer flagged the charge. She confronted Karen during a board meeting. Voices were raised, files were pulled, receipts were examined, and the whole thing blew open like a piñata stuffed with corruption confetti. It turned out Karen had been using HOA funds for all kinds of questionable things. Private landscaping, spa appointments labeled as wellness inspections, and a set of decorative porch lanterns she listed as security upgrades. When the other board members realized how much she'd spent, the room erupted into chaos. And because HOA drama spreads faster than wildfire in a drought, within 24 hours, the entire neighborhood knew everything. My farm was quiet that evening, but my phone wasn't. Anonymous emails, screenshots, residents apologizing on behalf of their community, people telling me they'd been scared to speak up against her for years. The next morning, she resigned from the HOA board. Not voluntarily, she was removed, publicly, loudly. For the first time since our conflict began, it seemed like her world was collapsing in ways I had absolutely nothing to do with. And then court day arrived. It wasn't dramatic, not like TV where everyone shouts and waves papers around. It was calm, quiet, procedural. Priya and I sat on one side of the small courtroom. Karen sat on the other, looking like she was trying to hold herself together with sheer willpower. Her attorney looked like a man who deeply regretted answering his phone 2 weeks ago. The judge reviewed the documents. He went through the photos of the signs, the videos of the trespass, the sheriff reports, the official notices, the property deed, the legal status of the deterrent devices. Every piece lined up like a perfect row of dominoes. Then he picked up the letter Karen's lawyer had sent demanding $42,700. He read 3 sentences, just 3. Then he set the letter down like it offended him. He turned to Karen's side of the room. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, "there is absolutely no legal basis for your claim. None." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the judge held up a hand. "You ignored posted warnings. You ignored property lines. You repeatedly trespassed. And the defendant followed standard legal procedures to deter that trespass without causing damage or injury. This is not just a weak case. It borders on frivolous litigation." Her attorney visibly winced. The judge continued, "Based on the evidence, I am dismissing your claim in full. And due to the cost and time burden placed on the defendant, I find grounds to award him restitution." He listed the numbers calmly. Repayment for crop damage, repayment for land repair, repayment for legal fees, court costs. Karen's jaw tightened with every line. By the time the total was read aloud, she looked ready to pass out. Then the judge delivered the final blow. "And Ms. Whitfield, you are formally prohibited from entering or crossing the defendant's property for any reason. Violation of this order will result in further legal penalties, including—" Karen didn't even wait to hear the rest. She stood up abruptly, muttered something angry under her breath, and stormed out of the courtroom. Her attorney followed her with a look that said, in polite legal terms, "Please lose my number." When she was gone, the courtroom felt lighter. Priya turned to me with the smallest smile I'd ever seen her allow in a professional setting. "You handled this exactly right," she said. And for the first time in months, I felt like a weight had finally lifted from my shoulders. When I got back home that day, the farm felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the tension that had wrapped itself around the land like a tight wire had finally snapped. The air felt clean again. The fields looked familiar again. Even the cattle seemed calmer, as if they sensed the world was back in order. I walked the property slowly, hand brushing over fence posts, breathing deeply as the wind rustled through the grass. Daisy grazed peacefully in her pasture, healed and gentle as ever. I paused beside her, resting my hand on her back, feeling that steady warmth. She blinked up at me like she understood everything. No engines, no trespassers, no entitlement cutting through my fields. Just quiet. Real, steady, long-awaited quiet. In that moment I realized something important. Sometimes standing up for yourself isn't loud, it isn't violent, it isn't about getting even, it's about setting boundaries calmly and firmly and letting the truth do the rest. Karen thought she could ignore consequences forever. But consequences are patient. And when they arrive, They arrive fully. As the sun started lowering over the hills, washing the farm in gold, I leaned on the fence and watched the shadows stretch. Peace wasn't just back, it felt stronger than before, like something earned. And with everything finally behind me, I couldn't help but smile and think, if someone tries to take your peace, you defend it, legally, calmly, completely. And sometimes, the universe handles the rest.